Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Today's guest is an award-winning game designer, author, editor, and co-founder of Monte Cook Games. Please welcome the one and only Shanna Germain to Epic Realms. Did I say it right?
It's perfect. Perfect.
Yes!
Yay!
We were talking a little bit beforehand that I'm very Minnesotan, and I really didn't want to put that Minnesotan long A on there because people make fun of me for saying Dagger and Dragon.
No, you got it right the first time. You're safe.
All
Doesn't
right.
matter.
So if I screw it up later, people
Yep.
know I went out of my way. Uh, so a lot of our guests and friends of the show have been to a place called Gamehole Con, and they keep telling me to go there. And you were at Gamehole Con this year, right?
Yeah.
How is that experience for you? How is that location for you? And what did you do while you were there?
It's actually one of my favorite conventions. I think they do such a good job of creating something that's inclusive and like it's small enough that you feel like you get to actually talk to people, but it's big enough that there's a lot going on. Plus, they have awesome food carts, which is really important. Coffee and ice cream. And it's just a really great atmosphere. I feel like I get a chance to hang out with fans. So I ran some games. I signed a bunch of books. We had a booth there. I did like a drinks with authors event. It was super fun. We got to gab about writing for a while. So it's like one of those, I don't know, it's just so cozy, which sounds weird because it's actually getting bigger every year, but it's still kind of keeping its cozy vibe, which I
That's
love.
great. I love that. So before your first book, when you were like becoming who you are, could you look ahead and be like, I'm going to be doing all these events at conventions like Gamehole Con or Gen Con or Emerald City Comic Con, those kinds of things? Did you see that in your future?
I didn't even know they existed. I mean, I like when I was like 5, I wanted to be Stephen King, right? So like I didn't know that writers did things other than write. So like it never would have occurred to me that you would go somewhere and do a thing with a bunch of other people. And especially in the geek realms, like I don't know, like I grew up in the 70s and like I feel like geeks were just a thing that you were at home. I didn't even know like that you could hang out with other geeks until I got to high school and started playing D&D with my friends. And I was like, oh, there are other geeks. Like this is cool. So yeah, no, I could never have imagined that. Like it's just wild.
How did you get introduced to tabletop role playing? You mentioned D&D in school. Like, what was your introduction there?
My introduction was I was actually about 5 or 6, and I had a babysitter who brought over bunnies and burros. And I didn't really understand any of it except that I got to be a bunny and I got to stomp around on the floor, and it was the best thing that had ever happened to me at that time because I love bunnies. I have a bunny tattoo.
Nice.
And so that was my first introduction, but I didn't really know that. Like I just thought it was like a game like any other, or maybe a story. And then it wasn't until high school that I kind of went back to it. I played on the guys' soccer team because this was long enough ago that we didn't have a girls' team. And all the guys on the guys' soccer team played this game and they like went out into the woods and they camped and they played a game like where they ran around in the woods with sticks. And I was like, this sounds right up my alley. And it was lovely. And the thing that it taught me that I think is so funny now is the thing it taught me is I didn't want to be the GM because the GM had to sit at the picnic table while everyone else got to run around in the woods with
Right,
sticks.
right.
And so I was like, that job sucks. I want that job.
So did you ever end up GMing then for that group, or did it just
I did
like
not know. I
no?
didn't GM until much older. Yeah, I was
Okay.
much older when I GM'd. Like we were all sitting at a table at that point. Nobody ran around in the woods when I picked role playing back up at a later age.
When you started doing writing and stuff, did some of that role playing growing up play into it, or was it completely separate?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I feel like I was always a really imaginative, tomboyish kid. Like I had big dreams about like what the world could be, and I was always building things and drawing maps, like even before I understood that was a thing that people did. Like I was drawing, like I grew up on a farm in upstate New York, so it's total hippieville. So I would draw maps of like the barns where all the animals lived. So I feel like sort of role playing and storytelling have always been like a big part of who I am, even though I didn't have any boxes to put them in the way that like you do now. And I certainly did not know that it could be a career. It could be a thing that you did every day for the rest of your life. That was not even a thought in my brain.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you have a problem at the beginning of your like writing career? Like, were you doing other stuff and be like, oh, I hope this works out, or did you just like write a thing and all of a sudden you doing awesome and successful?
Ooh, that's complicated and a long time ago. So let me
All right.
So I started writing. I started as a poet actually,
Okay.
and had some success as a poet, but poetry does not pay at all,
Mm-mm.
obviously. And so at the same time, I was bartending because I just was putting myself through college. I realized that I probably wasn't going to make a living as a fiction writer, so I started college. I have a TV radio degree, a psychology degree. I did firefighting for a while. I kind of did all the things. And then I started bartending to pay off my college loan. And during that time, I was writing on the side. So I was writing poetry and getting stuff published. But again, like not, there was no money in that.
Right.
And then I started working for a local newspaper and learned a ton of skills about like hitting deadlines and getting stuff off your plate and not just sort of spending 16 hours on the same sentence. And then I started writing erotica and found out that you could make a ton of money writing erotica.
Right.
And I was like, this is my thing. And so I wrote erotica for quite a few years. It was really wonderful and lucrative. And then I sort of got to the point where I didn't have any more erotic stories to tell. I was sort of like, I don't really know what else to say about sex. And I didn't want to keep going just for the money because it felt weird and I was itching for something new creatively.
Right.
So then I switched to like doing some essays and some fiction, and then I started writing for like World of Warcraft magazine. And so it's been this whole thing. And then for a while, I was working at a technical coffee roasting magazine. So it feels like I've sort of touched on a lot of things. I was writing for Glossy's magazines for a while and trade publications. And so if you can write about it and make money, I've probably done it in my life.
Nice.
So yeah, that was not the trajectory I expected at all.
And I would be remiss if I didn't ask this, because I know people are going to be like, "Why didn't you ask this question?" When it comes to the adult novels and writing those and putting those together, how do those differ from writing, say, a fantasy story or other books? Is the structure different? Is the way you tell the story different? Do you have to limit how much of different things you put in there?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think on one hand, like sex stories have a very specific format, right? Because sex has a very specific format. And I've always said since I started writing that my themes were sex and death. And I think the reason for that is because to me, they feel like these places where you can really deeply touch your humanity. You are naked in whatever way that means. You
Mm-hmm.
are exposed, you are vulnerable. And I'm really interested in stories of love and grief and those deep emotional places where we are most human. And I feel like love and sex are two, or sex and death are two places where that happens. We are stripped away of all of our sort of contrivances and bullshit.
Yeah.
And so I'm really interested in those places. And I think that one of the things that has stayed the same for me through stories and poems, no matter what genre I'm in, is this touch to those places of humanity. And so they're very different in some ways. They're very different on a marketing sort of genre perspective
Yeah.
in terms of yeah, the stories that you tell. But for me, the heart through them all is still very much the same. And I think also I really love breaking the rules. So if somebody tells me I have to do something one way, I
Don't
will
do it
do my
that way.
best to find
Amen to
another way
that.
to do it. There's just something in me that can't stand being told that there's only one way to do something. I find that
Right.
infuriating.
What was the trajectory then going from some of those to being like, okay, well, now I'm writing? Because it sounded like you kind of bounced around and you slowly gradually worked your way in to the gaming sphere as far as like writing and telling stories goes. What's kind of the was there like a specific point that was the big trajectory of like, okay, this is now what I'm doing?
Yeah, there were two trajectories, I think. And the first one was I hadn't written about game stuff at all. And I sort of had like gaming, and in particular video gaming, which is a love of mine, were sort of these things that I did on my own back. I was probably in my early 30s at that point. And I heard this program on the radio where these women were talking about how some new study had come out that said that women were the growing number of gamers, and particularly professional women who were like career driven and had had success. And these women were poo-pooing that idea. They were really like, oh, you can't have a career and be a gamer. And I got so mad because I was that person that they were talking about that I instantly started writing for gaming magazines like the World of Warcraft one and sort of putting myself out there as someone to like sort of prove that we existed and that we were doing all the things. And so that was my first like sort of angry foray into
Right.
that. So for a while I wrote about games, but I didn't write games.
Right.
And so then at one point I had met Monty and he and I were talking about this project that he was going to work on. And he was like, it's this little game. I don't know if anyone's going to like it. And he was describing it to me. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. I totally want to work on this game. And I
Right.
just sort of like, I have lots of editing experience. Please allow me to edit this. And so we talked about doing it. And at the time, Kickstarter was really new. This was 12 years ago. And so we were like, this Kickstarter thing sounds cool. Let's try it. Let's see if we can, make it work. And so that was actually the first game project that I worked on, sort of from the inside design perspective.
Okay.
And I had a great mentor, obviously, because Monty had lots of
Right.
experience.
Right.
And was able to bring my editing experience from lots of other things, including, sort of technical places into the actual game design aspects. And so that's how that all started. And then it kind of just blossomed from there. We had an unexpectedly good Kickstarter and then had to have a conversation of like, oh, do we need to start a company? I think we need to start a company.
Yeah.
So yeah, like so much of my life, I feel like there was this moment of passion or anger or, or prove something. And that was a moment of passion. I just felt so excited about this setting that he was describing that I wanted in.
And what was that setting?
That was Numenera.
Numenera.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that was the first one that we did. So, and it was just science fantasy, and that's something that I've always loved, but didn't really have like a term for. And the description of it, like being so far in the future with all this technology, just I don't know, it just got me very, very excited.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, it blossomed Monte Cook Games, right?
Yeah, so we said yes to making a company, obviously.
Yeah. How is
Yeah,
that trajectory? Because I've talked to a lot of people that kind of got their start with a Kickstarter and then, like, oh, I need to make an LLC and we need to do all this stuff. How is that going from the two of you all the way to now there's, other writers, authors,
yeah.
editors, game designers, artists, web design, media, the list goes on and on. And, you and Monty started this.
Yeah, sometimes that blows my mind, like to think about. So we started with just hiring two people. We knew we needed someone to take care of like the a lot of the administration stuff, and then we knew we needed someone to help us sort of distribute and talk to the printer and like all the things that we didn't know how to do. We knew how to make and design a game. We knew how to work with artists. We knew how. So we started small. We hired someone full time, someone part time, and then, as it happens with small businesses, we were working all the time. We were just working so hard. But we had this philosophy that we weren't going to hire someone unless we knew that we could afford them to keep them for forever, ideally,
Right.
that we could give them healthcare, that we could give them a 401k. So we had all these parameters about whether or not we could hire someone. And so until we knew that that could happen, we just sort of worked ourselves to the bone because it was a small company and a new company, and we had super great fans who were really supportive of the fact of what we were trying to do, and that was awesome. And then as we sort of stabilized, I would say like at the 5 year point, we kind of became an adult company, and we were like, okay, now we are functioning like a real company. Now we can hire some more people to take on things. And so it's gotten so much smoother. We have an amazing team, of just super talented and good people that we absolutely adore. And so it suddenly feels like it's a whole different business because we aren't all sort of busting our asses quite so much. And it is this organic growth where you're constantly checking your gut against all the other things to make sure that like you're succeeding and you're going to be able to succeed and you're not. I don't know, it's really complicated. And thankfully, like I said, we have a great team and we have really good skills, but we often are like gut checking, heart checking. Does this feel like the right decision for
Yeah.
us and our people? And for the games and for our players and for the world, that's important too. So it's a lot.
So having this company, you guys can put out, you know, books, games, whatever. Do you have a struggle at all, or is this a thing where you're like, this is a project I want to work on?
Mm.
Do I work on it separate from Monte Cook, or do I try and utilize Monte Cook to get this done? Do you have that kind of an issue at all?
We I think we don't. We're really we're really open. We say to our designers, tell us what you want to work on, and like we'll make it happen. But we're also like, and also if you want to freelance for other people, that's cool. If you've got your passion project, that's cool. We don't own any of that stuff that you do. Like we don't want to, right? We want you to be as creative as you can be outside of your real life or outside of your MCG life. And so we say, like, if you have something that you think would be cool and you want to bring to us, like, tell us about it, and we'll see if it works. we also say to all of our designers, like, the next Kickstarter, what do you want to make? Like, tell us what you want to make, because we don't want to be driven by, like, it sounds weird to say we don't want to be driven by the market, but we don't. We want to be driven by passion. And so if our people aren't excited about what they're making, it doesn't have, it's different. It just doesn't work as well. And so I feel like for me, because I do a lot of fiction, I feel like my fiction's over here. I do some freelance and then MCG stuff. Like, I know that MCG will let me do my passion projects in the game space. And I think that I can keep them separate without worry because of all those things. And it's, I don't know, I think we see our team sort of blossom because they can do that. And there are companies that don't allow that. And
Right.
I think it's bad for creative people to be hemmed in that way, or to feel like their ideas are going to get taken, or that something's not theirs. Like, it's just kind of crappy. And yeah, so we try to stay away from all that stuff.
And to have a company where you feel safe to say, I have an idea
Yes.
I want to talk to you about, and
Right.
and then knowing that they're open for that, and then go in and be like, okay, so I have this idea for this game, and insert whatever Monte Cook game has been out or is coming out, and have it be like, well, you know that's different from what we do. Let's do it.
Yeah.
It's not,
Yeah.
well, that's different from what we do, so you should go elsewhere. It's
Right.
let's give it a shot. To be open to
Right.
that, and to know, as a worker in a company, to have that comfort to know I can say this, and not just not and they can be listened, like there are ears that will listen and be accepted, and
Yeah.
something like that is really, really cool. Do you have a lot
Yeah.
of have there been a lot of things where things were brought up, and I don't want examples, but have there been times where people bring things up and are and everyone's like, yeah, that could be a good idea, but probably not? Does that happen, or is it like
Um,
somebody comes up with something and you're like, let's do it?
I think the latter is more common. And I think the reason for that is because everyone has a good sense of like what we do as a team. And
Mm-hmm.
so they're not going to bring us something that's outside the realm. Like, we have our art director did this really cool podcast, like a narrative podcast. And it's really cool and it's awesome. And he did it with some friends on the side. And like, we're supporting it. We're super thumbs up and it's great and we love it. But he also wasn't like, hey, do you guys want to become a podcast company? Right. So like,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that the team really understands like what we do, and if they're excited about it and it fits in our parameters, they tend to bring it to us. And if not, they know that we'll just support them sort of from the outside in whatever way we can help. So yeah, we don't have a lot of that. We do have a lot of great brainstorming sessions. Like, okay, we're going to do this modern magic book. Let's talk about all the things that can go in it. And like, of course, everything can't go in it. And some ideas that we're throwing at the wall are ridiculous. But that's the joy of brainstorming. So yeah, we do a lot of that.
Was there a difficulty going from, we're publishing something like role playing games, right? If you do a Numenera, putting that out there, and then, hey, we should publish a book from Monte Cook. Was that a difficulty, or was because you were part of this, telling stories, or writing a novel for, say, Numenera, isn't that big of a problem because you guys know what steps you need to take?
Yeah, I think they're very similar. I think it was much harder to do something like a game like Invisible Sun than it was to do our novels, because our novels are sort of just books with a different story on the inside.
Yeah,
And so we already had art directors who knew that. We had writers who knew how to make stories. We had editors who'd edited stories. Doing something like Invisible Sun, which is like, however much many pounds of different items that was much harder for us because of we didn't have the experience yet with like, how do we make 1,000 boxes, and how do we make like all these cards and all these weird statues. And so I think we're always pushing ourselves as a company because we're creatives and we like to do that, right? We like to do
right,
different things. And so we also did this thing called The Darkest House, which was like an online game with an app, and that was difficult because it wasn't a book. And
right.
so they're always difficult in the way you don't think they're going to be difficult. So yeah, so some things have been surprisingly difficult, but things like fiction versus games, I think, is much easier, smoother transition.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about your role within the company now. Like, you obviously co-founded, you and Monty Cook put the thing together and then started pulling people in. We kind of talked about that. But now you've got many hats, it looks like, besides co-founder, owner, managing editor, senior designer. What is this? What are all of these tasks? On your day, you go into work. what does that mean? Like, obviously, we don't want any like secrets or anything, but
Yes,
what
you do.
what kind of like what does that entail? You know, you mentioned to me you just had, you know, meetings all day or whatever. What what does your job really entail from a an audience perspective as far as a gaming company looking towards Monte Cook?
So I think it's interesting to sort of break this into three kind of answers, which I will try to make quick. So the first
That's okay.
answer was I did everything in the beginning, right? Like we talked about, I
Right.
was doing art orders and I was editing and I was writing and we were packing boxes. And I mean, it was, if it needed to be done, we were wearing those hats. And then I would say, sort of at that year 5, 6 mark, I was helped still on the leadership team. We have a leadership team that makes like big decisions for the company. And you know, then we have an ownership team, which is the owners of the company who make sort of bigger decisions. And then we had so I was working as a designer, I was still working as the managing editor, and I was doing sort of all of the like taking care of all the like when does this come out, and therefore when do we have need to have this part done, and when do we need to have, so all the project management stuff. And then in the last 5 years, we've managed to hire amazing people who've taken on a lot of that role, because the truth is, like, I'm good at those things, but my heart lies in the writing and the creation and that kind of stuff. So my job now has moved very much more toward designing stuff and making things and being on the design team, and you know, leading some projects. Like I just led the Old Gods of Appalachia game. I was the lead designer, which meant that I led the team and you know, made sure that things were happening on time and that we got all the art and that kind of stuff. But like some days I just get to be a designer, I just get to write things. Like I just wrote a ton of artifacts for this modern magic setting, and like they're so fun and I'm so happy with them, and like that's where my joy is. So I would say in the last year I've gotten to move into this place where I'm doing a lot more design and a lot less of the other stuff.
That's great. That's great. When you were doing this managing editor, is that like you line editing? You're just reading other people's stuff all day long? Is that kind of what you were doing, or because you're above, you're like, you know, managing editor? Were you managing the
Yeah.
other editors who are doing all of that and just kind of overseeing them? What is that really?
I think it's a little bit of both. So it is doing line editing, it's doing copy editing, developmental editing, it's making sure projects are turned in on time, it's making sure we have editors lined up to edit those projects. And then you go through all of the editors' comments and like sort of you're the bridge between the editor and the designer. And so you're saying, okay, well, this comment makes sense, so we're going to accept it. And then you go to the designer and you say, this, I'm not really sure that we want to make this change. Like, how do you feel about it? Is this universal? Do we make it here? And so there's a lot of conversations that are back and forth of, and like, you know, making sure the style guide is up to date so that the editors have a thing to work from. So there's a lot of pieces, parts that really have to do with like our language. It's also about getting sensitivity readers. It's about making sure that like a thing about like language to make sure that we're using language that's not ableist and things like that.
Yeah,
And so there's a lot of management of words, and there's a lot of management of people, and then there's a lot of bridging those multiple things. So it's quite an intense job. And it's our current managing editor is Terry Latorco, who's amazing at it. And I'm so glad she's here because she just, yeah, she makes everything so much smoother, and she makes our books look and read amazing. And that's awesome.
that's great. I know there's sometimes the, you know, I wrote this and then an editor says we need to fix this and the writer goes, no, we don't. Darn it, shame. But you having been now you're in a very interesting position because now you're your co-owner, co-founder, right? But you're also the designer. You used to be the managing editor. So now when they
Yeah.
come to you, you've got all of these different hats you've had. So how hard is it for them to come to you and be like, listen, you wrote this thing in here and we kind of want to, you know, I just got to talk to you. Like, how does that work out? And
That's very
obviously, talking to
astute.
you, it seems like that's not going to be an issue, but I want to get your perspective on
No.
that.
That's amazing. That is so astute. It is totally true that it is weird. It is hard to get people to be like, in this role, I am just the designer. Because they do have this deference, I think. And we try our best to keep the company really flat, like to only make it a hierarchy when it's necessary. Which is doesn't happen very often when you have a great team. So it's mostly just pretty flat. But I do think that like it helps that none of our team is divas. We've all done this for a long time. Our goal is to make the book the best that it can be, and so, or the game the best it can be. And so while we sometimes have big discussions, like Sean Reynolds and I have some really intense discussions sometimes about language and like what we're trying to say. He's a fantastic developer, and I'm someone who's like, words have to sound pretty.
Right.
so, so we can have these moments where we're really kind of haranguing about like what our goal is and how we get there. But it's never sort of a negative experience. It's just the understanding that we are both working really hard to get to the place where the game is the best that it can be. And also, like, you have to pick your battles, right? Sometimes you're just like, I can't care about that because I really care about this other thing. So let's talk about this other thing that I want the language to be different. Or there's a lot of conversations about like, this is what I was attempting to say, or this is what I really wanted to this I really want this element of the design to be doing this. And so we try to get to the root of like what we're really doing and not get so caught up in like the way that we do it, I guess. So yeah, we try to keep it really level, and we try to be like, I mean, I can't I think that's the great thing about having a great team and a great culture is that people, I mean, sometimes we get grumpy at each other, but we're always like, oh, I'm just such a grump today. Like, just ignore everything I'm saying.
Right.
Let's just do this. And I think there's a lot of just like real humanity in that team. And that's sorry, there's a big truck outside.
I
There-
didn't hear a thing.
okay, good. And that I think that makes it a lot easier to bring things back and forth, right? And there's also like that idea of active listening, where you listen to what someone is bringing you carefully and without sort of responding right away, so that they feel safe, so that they feel like there's a place where they can bring these changes or needs, or all those kinds of things. Because I think we're taught that corporate doesn't have space for that, the companies don't allow that. And we work really hard to make sure that people feel safe
Yeah.
to bring, whether it's an editing change or a bigger issue, right? We want to create that workspace.
When you're going through and you're putting stuff together, would you say that your strengths are in the story and the building the background of a world, or do you think that like you're really good at throwing together like here's some of the mechanics of the whatever, the who's a what's it, the numbers and the way that it works sort of spiel. Um, do you think you have strengths and weaknesses in those, or are you pretty good at both, or what is your opinion on yourself, which is always really hard to answer?
Yeah, it is. It is, except that I kind of do know the answer. I am pretty great at world building, and I'm pretty great at language, and I think I'm pretty solid in characters. I'm really creative. I did not understand numbers to save my life. Like, thank goodness we have a developer who's amazing. And I've gotten better at this sort of more technical, tactical numbers, game design stuff. Like, I've gotten a better intuitive understanding of it, but it's never my going to be my strength because it's not my passion. Like,
Yeah.
I will tell stories all day long, and I will make up worlds, and I will make up words, and characters. Like, I love that stuff so much. But like, once you start getting me down to the place where you're like, and how much damage does this character do? I'm like, I don't know. He just makes you feel crappy. Like, right? He gives you the worst dream you've ever had, and you have it every night for 10 days, so you feel crappy. And then I'm like, oh right, and I have to figure out like what that means in a game design
Yeah.
term. Thankfully we do narrative heavy games, so it really plays to my strengths in that way. But yeah, I don't love mechanics that much. They're
Right.
just not my.
I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, just a wee tad here. We're talking about game design and inclusiveness and being comfortable, and I'm bringing this up because I know we have a handful of audience members who listen because they have difficulties with eyesight, and they almost always ask game designers what the plan is as far as visual goes in this modern digital age. Obviously you've
Mm.
got the world of D&D Beyond where you can zoom in and look at things, and it's very accessible for people with vision issues. Are you guys looking at anything like that, or any issues with that, or any way to incorporate that for people with, say, a vision impairment in a world that is visual?
Yeah, yeah, this is a thing that we have tried so hard to do well and to do right, and I feel like we still have so far to go. We like it's this is an interesting struggle where our layout people are like, look at how pretty it looks. We're like, yeah, but you can't read it. Like, no one can read it. You have to make it readable and bigger. And we do try to make our PDFs accessible in various ways. But it's a difficult thing because technology is always changing and everyone uses different kinds of readers. And so we have done things that make it easier. I don't think we are yet where we would like to be. And some of that's just that it's hard to find resources. It's hard to figure out, like, it reminds me a little bit of when we were working on No Thank You Evil. I wanted to find the best font for kids who were struggling to read.
Yeah.
And so I was doing all this research on dyslexia and what's the best font and like anything else that's reading difficulty. And there was no consensus at all. There was nothing that said this is the best font for kids. And so all we could do is calve off the ways that made it difficult. So, like, any extraneous elements or things that were all in caps or certain colors. And so we could sort of get to the closest we could by saying, okay, well, we know this doesn't work, we know this doesn't work, we know this makes it hard, we know this makes it hard. And so I feel like right now we're in that space. And so if people have like a great resource to point us to, we are all in for that, because I think we're not doing as good of a job as we would like to in our hearts, and we just haven't figured out how to get there yet. But we do try to make things as accessible as we can. And what, some of the ways that we do that are like, we we've had to work with the printer to be like, things need to be brighter, things need to be have more contrast, like, which is just a really weird part of printing, where sometimes things come back and it's all sort of flattened
Yeah.
in terms of the contrast, which makes it more difficult. And so there's all these ways that that you can make things better. What I don't know is how to make it perfect, or if there isn't even a perfect, because it
Yeah.
would be nice. It would be nice if we could get there.
Yeah, for sure.
That would be really awesome.
I mentioned this beforehand, before we got started, because it's something that I think is important as a person who sees it. And while I am a guy in the gaming space, uh, there is a definite change for the better that's been happening over the course of the last couple of years in the gaming space. It's no longer the boys' club, which I always hated. I always thought that that was ridiculous. Ever since I first started gaming 20 years ago, I'm like, no, let's get all of our female friends in here and play because it'll be a lot better. How have you seen the gaming space change over the last course of the last couple of years, and how do you think you guys have done in helping to usher that in?
Mm. Well, I also think that it's changed so much for the better. It's not yet where we would like it to be, but I think the growth is just, I don't know. It just makes me so happy. I was just thinking about when you were talking about this, going to Gamehole Con. This was the first convention I had been to since sort of pre-pandemic, so it's been a while.
Yeah,
And seeing the just the beautiful range of people who play our games and who had nice things to say and who saw themselves in our art or in our language, like I was brought to tears twice by someone like telling me the story of how my work helped them or affected them. I'm going to get teary just talking about it. And like, there is no greater thing you can do as a creative, I don't think, than touch someone's life, right? Then make them realize they're not alone in this world. And so I feel like when you get people who are designing games from their experiences, from the heart, from this passion of wanting people to feel seen, it just makes such a big change. It's just such a ripple out change, right? And it's a small thing. And we also do this with our team. We have a really great, diverse team. And the reason we do that is because they have stories to tell that no one else can tell. They have games in them that no one else can make. And so, we were talking earlier about whether, people bringing their ideas to us, and like, we're like, we hired you as a designer because you are the person you are. We want you to tell your story. And so that's one of the ways I think that we create space, I hope, for people to feel seen, to feel supported, to feel like they can be themselves at the table and ideally in their lives. And so I do think, boy, we're just seeing such a huge change. We're seeing so many more people not just be present in those spaces, but have support in those spaces, have a team, have a community, find themselves. Because, like, I think it's very hard to walk into a place where you don't feel welcome, or you don't feel seen, or you don't feel represented by yourself. And so, the more community of
yeah,
people who are like you, the better, because now you have support and you have a team and it's not so hard and it just grows sort of by itself. And there's so many companies out there who are making change, like, who are just sort of doing this amazing work, and so many of them are quiet about it, but you can see it out there and you can see it, and it's making room for more designers who are independent to do amazing things. And that makes me happy too, because right? Gamers, a diverse group of gamers is one thing, but like people making games, getting their hands in there, getting their stories out there, that's just a whole nother level.
I love it. I love it. It's awesome. You talked about the kids game you guys worked on. Tell me about that. Tell me about that because I love games that include the young ones that bring the kids in and let them understand what role playing is without having to be bogged down in numbers and deep crazy politics or whatever it may be. They can just sit down, they can just play something simple and have fun being imaginative kids and give them that introduction. So tell us about this game, tell us how it came about. I want to hear all about it.
So No Thank You Evil is the name of it. And it came about because we had players who were taking Numenera, which is actually pretty dark, and adapting it to their kids so they could play with their kids. And we were like, that's a lot of work and that's awesome. But we could also do that thing. And so we had a lot of conversations at the beginning about what this is because our goal was family game. And here's the thing, like family game has a weird connotation, like
Yeah,
that,
it
family
does.
friendly, which is not what we meant by that. What we meant by that was like you can have three siblings of entirely different ages who can sit down and play this game because it felt to us like that was a thing that role-playing games had not yet tackled. And so we were like, all right, well, a 4-year old, a 6-year old, and an 8-year old have totally different ideas of what's fun. And they have different ideas of how much they can take on and what's interesting. And so like we broke it down into like, okay, there's a level where you just don't have, it's not as complex. And
Right.
you can play at the same table as your 10-year-old sibling who wants the complexity and wants all the rules and that kind of stuff. So that was one of the first things that we realized was we wanted a game that you didn't have to invite 6, 8-year-olds over to play,
Right.
that you could play at the table with your family and adults too. And so we really based heavily on like fairy tales and the things that like I'm a 12-year-old at heart, so it wasn't that hard to get into sort of the brain of a 12-year-old. It's like I can have a robot and a pet dog that talks and a ghost dog and a rabbit dog. And like
Yeah.
all these things can be true. And I can throw pizza as a weapon and I can, do all these things because we were like, this is how kids see the world. Anything's possible. And we really wanted to sort of push that forward, this idea that you could do anything. And then we also, as we were designing, I was very much like, I felt like we were like, you're competing with puppies in video games, right? And so like it had to be something that kept their attention, that was easy,
Right.
that was engaging. And so like there's things like, you can talk to a T-Rex if you put your sleeves like this, and you do this. And so there's like activities too. So that there's this way of engaging that doesn't just require you to sit still at the table because we know how hard that is for all of us, really.
Yeah.
um, and then it's low math, it's very tactile in a way that you can touch things. There are ways to play if you're nonverbal, or if you're selectively nonverbal you can play without communicating or talking. And so we tried to kind of cover all the things. Light math, we figured kids can do up to 6 and be cool with it, but once you get past 6, so we did a D6. We tried to do fonts that were really readable for kids who were struggling to read. So we kind of tried to like basically destroy all the hurdles to gaming with families. And on top of that, like included a ton of art that was designed to showcase kids of all sizes and ages and abilities and interests. And that was super fun. Like I loved writing the art orders for that because you just get this wild, amazing, imaginative stuff.
That's awesome.
That was a very long answer, but there was a lot in that game.
There is a lot in that game, and we might just have you come back down the road to talk about details like that. Just do that for every single game you guys have.
Ooh, that would be long.
Obviously, Numenera. Probably is that. I'm guessing that's your biggest game, right? Like that's the one I've known for a while.
It's certainly our I would say maybe our flagship game.
Yeah.
I think Invisible Sun is probably like our sort of the game that we are known for sort of after that,
Okay.
because of its sort of weirdness. And there's a lot of controversy when we launched the game because it's quite expensive and large and has tons of pieces. And then Cypher System, I think, because it's so variable, people can play in all
Yeah.
the genres they want to, and it's sort of pick up and play. So I think it's hard to know from the inside, but that's my guess.
Okay. Okay. And you've got a new cipher system coming out, right? Is it a new system or a new book?
We have new books coming out. The one that I'm working around right now is called It's Only Magic. It's modern magic. And so like if you loved like the magicians or, you know, any of the sort of modern magic where you get to sort of walk around the city and there are witches and also you get to go like I just made this really cool cipher that's called Moss Girl where it like protects you and you turn into moss and no one can find you. Like and so I think that for people who want to play some modern magic, it's going to be super fun. Dominique Dickey is making this setting, and it's a very very cool setting in there. They've just got all kinds of cool ideas, and they're doing really neat stuff with it. So, so yeah, that's one of the things that we're working on right now.
Okay. And for those that are like strictly like I only play D&D, I only play have fun. How would you describe the system to them? How would you explain what it is and what the world's like and kind of what the system's like?
The system is quite narrative focused, and it's super easy. The GM doesn't have to roll any dice, so they can walk around the table and scare their players as they like. And you create a character by making a simple sentence. I'm a blank blank who blanks. So I'm a funny writer who, you know, is gonna have pizza for dinner, whatever. So it's just a sentence, right? So you can be a fighter, you can be kind of anything you want to be because you combine the sentences together, when you combine the sections of the sentence together, there's just thousands of possibilities. And then it's all just on a level system. Everything has a level. You roll against the level, make it easier, harder. It's super simple. And it is really narrative driven. So you don't spend a lot of time looking at your character sheet. So if you're really into like numbers and lots of dice and all that kind of stuff, it's going to seem very light for you. But if you're into the narrative stuff and making cool characters who do cool and interesting things, it's
Yeah.
probably very much up your alley.
Nice. Nice. Do you have any new Kickstarters coming up that you can think
Uh,
of
yeah, yes, I do. Can I talk
that you
about
can
it?
talk about that you
I
can
don't
talk
know
about?
if we
If
announced
you
it
can't
yet.
talk about it, just say I don't think I can talk about them.
Okay, I don't think I can talk about it, but we did just finish a Kickstarter for Invisible Sun, where it's a reprint because we sold out a couple of times, and so we're doing a new book as part of that. And we typically do two Kickstarters a year. That's our kind of company business model.
Okay.
So you can expect two Kickstarters in 2024.
What about the Devil's Dandy Dogs? You mentioned that to me earlier, and I was like, "Wait, what's that? I didn't see that. I didn't see that anywhere." And then I look back, it's like, "Oh, I did see that."
Yeah, we did a Kickstarter that was sort of devil themed. Monty had a couple of ideas for these cool narrative, interesting games that didn't use the cipher system but used something else. And as I was talking about earlier, he came to the team and said, "Hey, do you have anything that you want to do that's devil themed?" And before this, I had written a game called We Are All Mad Here, which is fairy tale and mental health and combines the two.
Yeah.
And in that, I had written a poem about the devil's dandy dogs, which is something that I love. This story of the dogs that help the devil. And I was like, I want to write a game about the devil's dandy dogs. And so we made this game. It's a narrative game, no prep. You show up, you have a pre generated character that is a dog who collects souls for the devil. And the whole game is who can tell the best story about all the dogs going out and collecting the soul. And so the story is that you come back with the soul, and now you're trying to entertain the devil by telling them the story of going to get the soul, and you're playing cards. And so there's like a tarot deck that sort of guides the whole story, and then the dogs have their abilities and all that kind of stuff. And so it's very fun. It's like a very pack oriented, group oriented thing. And it's very much about taking on the role of the storyteller as your dog would. So there's like a frivolous dog who maybe doesn't always tell the truth as part of telling their story. And then there's the protective dog who's like, I did all the things, right? And so you get to like really jump into these personas and these perspectives to tell these stories. And I think the deck of cards is huge. So you're always going to have a completely different story. And it can be in any setting. It can be modern or magical or
Right.
mystical or space or whatever the cards come up. So it's got a lot of versatility to it.
Are they all going after? Are they all telling the same story, or are they all telling their
Yeah.
own story? So they all went as a group, went and got
Yeah, they
this
work
one
as a pack.
soul.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
it.
And so they get these, and you get these pacts of the packs where you get like a group activity, like a group ability that you can use, but then everyone has their own abilities too. And yeah, it's pretty it's pretty wonderful. We played it at GameholeCon quite a bit, and I know that a couple of jams got to make their players cry because of like the moving story that came up, and I was like, yes,
I
I
love that because
succeeded.
it really reminds me from your explanation. It reminds me of the old the improv theater, the yes and theory. The yep, that's what
Yeah,
happens, and this, and
yeah,
you have to go along with what's going on.
yeah.
You
It's
can't say
very
no, that's
much
not how it happened. And I
that.
love that because that is what makes improv hilarious, and I can see that being
Yeah,
what makes that game super fun, especially
yeah.
with
Well,
cards and other things that affect it.
yeah, and one of the goals is to fail because when you fail, you tell a wilder story. Like the most wild thing happens when you fail really big. And so it's in most games you're like trying to succeed all the time, but in this game, like if you fail, it's awesome because then like the big wild wonderful thing happens and you get to really impress the devil. So it's kind of got a backwards twist that I really love.
I love that. I love that. What do you think is your favorite thing that you can talk about right now that's like recently came out? You're like, this just came out and I am so dang excited for it. Again, that you can talk about. That you're like,
You
oh
know,
my gosh, I can't stop talking about it.
I feel like the Devil's Dandy Dogs actually might be that because it was a really hard game for me to write because it was a whole new game system and it took me a long time to we played we probably played half a dozen internal play tests where it was just so broken, like it just didn't work. And that's a real place where you realize as a creator that like you have to have this ego that allows you to. The coyotes are barking outside right now, so as I'm
Perfect
talking
timing.
about
Perfect
dogs, it's
timing.
making me laugh.
I don't
So you
need a
have to have this
soundtrack. There we go.
you have to have this real ego that you're like, all right, I'm making a thing that matters and I believe in it, even though it's just falling apart at the table. But then you have to have this humility where you're just like, okay, and it's falling apart, and that's okay because I'm gonna figure out how to fix it, and everyone's helping me get better. And so, like, those places of playtests are just really can be really emotional when you put your heart into this game. So I think Devil's Dandy Dogs probably is the thing. I will say that Predation which is the far future dinosaur game that I wrote, is sort of one of my real heart spaces. And I'm writing an adventure for that right now for something that's going to come out next year. And I'm remembering how much I love that game. And then I just wrote a fairy tale adventure for the We Are All Mad book. So I feel like I'm like right now going back and revisiting some of the stuff that I've done in the past. And it's always lovely when you go back and do that and you like the thing that you made.
Yeah.
You still like it. You're like, oh, thank goodness.
All right. I want to ask you. You mentioned about how that was kind of unbalanced at that one point, and you're like, you had to fix it and play test. What is Monte Cook's games process
Mm.
for playtesting? Like, do you have like a set group of people that just play test the game? Do you just go to conventions and play test with the public? Like, what is the process there for doing that? Especially with the game, say you've got a game coming out and you want to play test it, but you can't tell anybody you're doing that, or you're working on something, but you don't want everyone to know. I know we've had game designers in the past that they say stuff and people are like literally zooming in on YouTube videos that are on there to try and find little tidbits. So what do you guys kind of do for your playtests?
Well, so it's interesting because Kickstarter sort of helps with that in two ways. One of the ways is we often have a playtest level where you can back and you get the stuff early, and then you can playtest it if you want to. So basically, it's a level where you get this to see the stuff early, and then we also send you playtest materials. And some of the feedback that we get from that is super great. The other way that Kickstarter helps is that we don't start working on something until it's been a successful Kickstarter. So there are very few things that we can't talk about that we're already working on. There are things that we can't talk about that we're planning the Kickstarter for. But if we're at the level of play testing a product, it has almost always been in a successful Kickstarter. And so the world knows that it's coming.
Okay.
We do most of our playtesting in-house with our team. We playtest every Wednesday in the afternoons. Sort of a section of our design team who can come. We just finished playtesting my fairy tale adventure, and then we're playtesting the strange adventure that's going to be out in the Cyber System adventure book next year. And the reason that we do that is because it's good for the game, but it's also really good for our designers. It allows us to think critically about the game that we're playing at the table. It makes us see what someone else's flaws are, but also what someone else's strengths are, and how we might be able to utilize those in our own games. And there's an understanding, I think, when you play test for other designers that they understand. how to pinpoint on the thing that's broken rather than try to give you the solution, right? Because it's the designer's job to come up with the solution for what's broken, and it's the playtester's job to say this feels broken. And then we can, you can brainstorm and stuff. So we do most of our playtest stuff in house. We run through the adventure, and depending on who it is, like what it is, like I had someone else run an Old Gods of Appalachia adventure because I wanted to make sure what I had written was right for the person playing it. Because when you're GMing your own adventure that you wrote, it's supposed to be in there, and so you are playtesting different
Yeah.
things, like levels and stuff like that. But with Old Gods, the language is so fluid and florid and has all this wonderful sort of sing-song essence to it that I needed to make sure that underneath that it was really clear what you needed to be doing. So I had someone else run it for me, and so that I wasn't there to give advice. And so I think it depends on the game. Like I said, for two of the games that I've had hard times with, we did long play tests. For No Thank You Evil, we took it out into the world and we specifically play tested it with kids who were maybe on the autism spectrum or who were neurodivergent in different ways. We had a couple of kids who were nonverbal, and so we really play tested the heck out of it at that level because we wanted to make sure that we were really meeting those
Right.
needs. So I think it depends on the game a little bit.
Do you find that doing the playtest is more work than fun? Or do you still have, or do you still enjoy? Because that's the thing. Like you're going out there and you're role playing. You're going to a convention and you're playing the game. You're designing the game. You're putting. When you sit down at a table to play it, do you get to sit down and enjoy it, or do you sit down and you're like, this is work. I would rather be somewhere else.
I think most of the time, because our designers are so advanced, I do enjoy it. And it's either because I'm enjoying the play or because I'm enjoying the puzzle of sort of figuring out what's not working.
Right.
And my brain likes both of those things. And so sometimes you get both in the same play test, and sometimes you get one or the other, depending on sort of how far along the thing is that's being written. As a GM or as the designer, sometimes it's really, like I was saying before, sometimes it's really hard. You're like, when we play tested the dinosaur companions for predation, those were also really broken, like the first 3 or 4 times. And I was like, we're trying so hard, you guys. I don't know if this is ever going to work. And I was just sort of having this, like, this was so important to me.
Right.
And we just couldn't figure out how to make it work. But then that moment where you're like, oh, I know the answer. I have an idea. And then that next play test and it works. You're just like, I don't know. There's just this, it's the reason you do the hard work. It's the
Yeah.
reason you do the hard thing is to have these moments of joy. So I think it really depends on kind of what's happening at the table.
Right. Do you have any upcoming conventions or anything? I think you said you might be at Northwest Con and Emerald City Comic Con.
Yep, I'll be at Northwest Con and Emerald City Comic Con. Monte Cook Games always goes to Gen Con and Gamehole Con, so some segment of the team will be there. I know we do some international stuff as well, but I don't usually get to go to those. So those are the big ones in the spring. Yeah.
Okay. Do you find that you have people that come to some of these gaming conventions with some of your older books to have signed?
Yeah.
And how does
Yeah. It
that
makes me
feel?
so
How does
happy.
that
Oh,
feel
it's
to
so
you? And do
good.
other people go, "What's this?" And they're like, "What's this? Wait a second, you did all of these other books?"
I think it's interesting because people often apologize when they bring non-gaming things to sign. And I think that's really sweet, but I don't know why. Because, like, is there anything that makes your heart happier than someone being, I love this book and I brought it, and will you sign it?
Yeah.
So I do think, like, sometimes people bring their erotic. I also wrote a nonfiction book about sex, and so sometimes people are a little more discreet when they sort of bring those over, because and you want people to be comfortable. So I think, yeah, they do bring someone. I had a short story published earlier this year, and someone said at Gamehole Con was like, I loved that short story. And that blew me away because it was just this short story in this magazine that, like, I don't know, I didn't expect anyone to have ever even heard of, much less read. And so there are these moments where, I don't know, it's like, it makes me always remember that we sort of do that sort of stereotypical thing with we contain multitudes, right? We are interested in so many things as human beings, and I love that when those places intersect, and people love something else that I've worked on. I just think it's the best.
That's great. That's great. Well, I look forward to at one of these conventions, hoping to run across you and say hello. And
I will have my Sharpie in hand.
awesome. People can find you on Mastodon, Shanna Germain at mastodon.social. Blue Sky, Shanna Germain, Shanna Germain .bsky. I don't even know if I'm supposed to say bluesky.social or just say
No.
bsky.social. I don't understand how that works. I mean, I've also got an account there too, so I can't really complain too much. Or at
I don't know.
Patreon, you've got a Patreon.
Ooh,
Shanna Germain
yeah.
at Patreon. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's very the Patreon is very much my heart space. I kind of do these love rants every week or so about something that I'm thinking about. They're just these kind of circuitous essays about something that's in my mind or that's important to me. I also do like little craft essays about how to keep focused and do better. We do write-ins on Zoom, like depends on my schedule, but sometimes a couple times a week. We have a Discord, so it's really just like this community of writers or of readers, and we talk a lot about like what we love and what makes us happy in the world, and how to keep doing the thing that we're passionate about. And so, yeah, it has kind of grown into this wonderful community, which I really really adore.
Awesome. And of course, MonteCookGames.com. Go check that out. Check out all the things, guys. Go and give Shanna a follow on all the social medias, and check out the Patreon, and give all your support. They're doing you guys are doing awesome work. So thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
everything.
Thanks for having me. This has been really fun.
Yeah, for those that are watching live stream, stick around, ask some of your questions, throw them in chat. We will get to your questions in chat, so throw them in there and we'll get to them. It's gonna be awesome. That's everybody's favorite part. Everybody that's a guest, they love the live audience questions. At the end, they're like, oh my god, that end part was great every time. So I look forward to your guys' questions, and we'll get to that here in just a moment. But for all the listeners, I want to thank you all for supporting our Movember fundraiser. We raised over $1,000 for it. Prostate cancer, testicular cancer, mental health awareness, suicide prevention. Thank you so much. With your help, the team that I am a part of raised over $5,500 for this charity. It was a great cause. It was a great month. You guys did awesome. And thank you all to everybody listening who participated in Movember. I appreciate you all for that so very much. Also, our next episode, we're going to be joined by Fate of the Norns RPG owner, a friend of the show, Andrew Velkoskis. He's going to be joining us live December 18th. That podcast will be available December 19th, right in time for the holiday season, because we all know that Odin is Santa Claus, right? We all know that, right? In January, of course, we're going to have paranormal researcher and author Amelia Cotter is going to be joining us to talk about ghosts and the paranormal. We're also going to have Corey Kazenska, gotta have a hard time saying his name, Corey Kaneska, who is a huge award-winning board game designer. We're going to have Mike Mason from Chaosium Games, author Deborah Wild. We're going to have an amazing, amazing 2024. So thank you for being here. Make sure to rate, review, follow, click all the buttons, do all the subscriptions. I appreciate it so much. So, for Shanna Germain, aka Shanna Germain, because I got to pronounce it right, I am Nick, and thank you for listening to Epic Realms.